Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to another video on my channel. My name is Josh Fan of ShowMeFootball.com and ArrowheadAddict.com, and I wanted to make a video today talking a little bit more about the Kansas City Chiefs' current pass rush situation and more specifically their defensive end situation, because the last video I made, I reacted to Melvin Ingram signing with the Miami Dolphins, and in that video, I kind of said, if you didn't see it, you could either watch it, click off the video real quick, watch it, come back, or I'll just kind of give you a summarized version of it here. But it's not the fact that Melvin Ingram was a world beater or anything like that. Like, yes, it would have been nice to have him back, but losing him isn't the worst thing in the world. That being said, my concern with the fact that he signed with the Dolphins instead of the Chiefs is, what else is left out there for the Chiefs? It would be different if the defensive end market wasn't picked clean already. There's still a few names left out there, and you can tell by the title of the video I'm going to talk about those names because I still think there's guys that can help. I just would have personally rather had Melvin Ingram because of the familiarity. We know that he helped this team last year. He had a big impact, and et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, I was concerned that I would have rather had Melvin Ingram compared to the field, what's left out there, because there's not a lot left out there. There's a little bit left out there, and we're going to talk about that. So all that being said, I got three names that are left in free agency. Some of you might already be able to guess what those names are. It's kind of the same three names we've heard for a little bit, but I definitely think the Chiefs still need to bring in a veteran edge because I think there's unfair expectations being put on George Karlaftis, a rookie, and pretty much what you had last year to just be good enough. George Karlaftis, Frank Clark, Mike Dan, and Josh Kano, that's not good enough. You need another veteran, someone that can come in and help and be a leader in the locker room too, that veteran presence. I said the same exact thing last year, especially after Melvin Ingram signed with the Steelers instead of the Chiefs. This team still needs pass rush, and they bet on their guys. They went into the season with what they had. We've seen that doesn't work. We've seen that's not a winning formula. Betting on Frank Clark to finally break out in 2022, we've done all that already. It doesn't work. So they need another veteran. They need someone else that can step in and be reliable. So let's get into the names. Number one is Jason Pierre-Paul, who was last with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Chiefs fans should know him pretty well since he did a lot of damage in Super Bowl 55. The season in which the Tampa Bay Buccaneers won the Super Bowl, Jason Pierre-Paul was a very productive pass rusher for the Bucs. He had 9.5 sacks that year, along with 34 solo tackles and 7 tackles for a loss, 14 QB hits too. Pretty productive. Now, this past season, 2021, it wasn't great. His production definitely dipped off a little bit. He only had 2.5 sacks. He also missed some games due to injury. He only played in 12 games in 2021. And he's getting a little bit older. He's about 33 years old. And I know what a lot of people are thinking. Chiefs are trying to get younger. Jason Pierre-Paul doesn't really fit their plans. Honestly, I'm not looking at it like that. I know the Chiefs are trying to get younger. That doesn't mean they can't bring in a veteran that's over 30. Not every single player has to be under 30. You can still bring in a veteran for a 1-year deal and it'll be fine. And when I read that stat, 2.5 sacks, a lot of people are going to think, oh yeah, not that big of a factor. Well, let's remember that Melvin Ingram only had a couple sacks last year, but he still had a really big impact on this defense. And also Jason Pierre-Paul, he's got a Super Bowl pedigree. He played with a winning team, multiple winning teams. In fact, he played under Steve Spagnuolo in New York, so there's actually a little bit of connection there between the Chiefs and Jason Pierre-Paul. And also, at this point in free agency, you're not really going to find guys that are under 30 and still pretty good. Those guys are all on teams. Those guys all have pretty good contracts right now. At this point in free agency, it's going to be guys that are a little bit older. So Jason Pierre-Paul is definitely a name to look at. I think he'd be a solid addition to this team. I think he's actually the closest player to Melvin Ingram of all the guys left. I think he definitely would emulate what Melvin Ingram brought you last season. And in a reduced role at this stage in his career, I think he could still be pretty effective. Next on the list, we've got Carlos Dunlap. Carlos Dunlap is actually one of the better players left out there. He is actually probably better than Melvin Ingram. He still had really solid production last year for the Seattle Seahawks. He was released this offseason. It's kind of weird what's gone on between Dunlap and Seattle. Seattle traded for him 2 seasons ago from the Cincinnati Bengals. He had a resurgence with the Seahawks, had about 8 sacks. And then they cut him, brought him back on a cheaper deal. This year, he had 6.5 sacks, and then they cut him again. There's still a possibility he ends up going back to Seattle. Kind of like how we all felt Melvin Ingram was an automatic re-sign at the end of this season. That's how Seattle kind of feels about Carlos Dunlap, but he hasn't been signed yet. He's still a free agent. I think the Chiefs could definitely swoop in and grab him. Carlos Dunlap has actually quietly been pretty damn good still, and he's still out there, which is interesting to me. I would have figured he'd be signed by now, even if it wasn't by the Seahawks. His exact numbers from last year, looks like I had 2020 and 2021 flip-flopped, but he had 8.5 sacks, 24 solo tackles, 8 tackles for a loss, and 14 QB hits for the Seahawks. Those are really solid numbers. You'd absolutely take that on this Chiefs team right now, and I think he could absolutely solidify the pass rush. I think he's the best available, and I think it'd be a home run if the Chiefs brought him in. I mean, he'd be a perfect addition to this pass rush, and I know I bag on Frank Clark a lot, and I'm going to do it again. I think Carlos Dunlap can be what Frank Clark was supposed to be, honestly. I think he's better. I think he's better at this stage in both of their careers, so I would love if they brought him in. I mean, Karlaftis, Chris Jones, and Dunlap would make me feel a hell of a lot better than Karlaftis, Chris Jones, and Frank Clark. I'm not sure how much money he's looking for. The Chiefs have a decent chunk of money right now. They'd have a lot more if they could get that Orlando Brown extension done, but I don't think Dunlap would cost too much, so I'd be hopeful that him and the Chiefs could get something done. All right, and then the last guy on my list is, of course, defensive end Akeem Hicks, who last played for the Chicago Bears. The most interesting part about Hicks is that he is able to play all over the defensive line. He's been listed at D-tackle before. He's been listed at defensive end before. He is over 300 pounds. To be exact, he's about 335 pounds. He can move inside with Chris Jones, and I still think that you have to respect him. I think he'd be an upgrade over Jerron Reed, too, and he can rush from the edge. I think he'd be a great piece for this defensive line, especially since Spags and that defensive staff likes to move players around on the defensive line, and I think they plan on doing that with Karlaftis. Having Akeem Hicks, having the other 2 guys I mentioned, too, would help with this, but especially with having Hicks, would give you more flexibility to do a bunch of different things with the defensive line because you'd have multiple different threats that can give you a lot of different things, such as Akeem Hicks and George Karlaftis. I think we can expect to see Karlaftis rush from the inside some, especially with his size, or his build, rather. Last year for the Bears, Akeem Hicks only played in 9 games. Keep that in mind. He did struggle with injury a little bit, but the Chicago pass rush was much better when he was in the lineup. Last year, despite only playing in 9 games, Hicks had 3.5 sacks, 19 solo tackles, 5 tackles for a loss, and 9 QB hits. He played most of his snaps from the interior last year, which shows that he still has that ability to push the pocket and be a good pass rusher from the inside, even at his age. And he's still only 32. He's not super old, but he's not super young either. Only 32 years old. I think he's still got a good bit left in the tank. I don't think he'd be super expensive. Dunlap is certainly at the top of my list, but if they can't get him, Hicks is probably my second choice, especially given the versatility. So, yeah, I would definitely be happy with any of these 3 guys, really. I still think the Chiefs need that veteran presence, like I said, but I'm going to hear from you guys. What do you think of my 3 suggestions for the Chiefs to still sign in free agency to bolster their pass rush? Do you agree, disagree? Let me know in the comments. All that being said, make sure you like, share, and subscribe so more Chiefs fans can find this. And make sure you check out my work on ShowMeFootball.com and ArrowheadAddict.com. I will see you all in the next one.